On the eve of Donald Trump's first news conference as president-elect, the internet blew up with the reports of an unconfirmed intelligence report by a respected British operative that Russia had compromising information on Donald Trump and might try to use it to influence decisions he would make as president.
A thing like that should have never been written, it should never have been had, and it should certainly never have been released.
But it was released in vivid detail on BuzzFeed and in summary by CNN. And that made Mr. Trump, well, a little angry. Listen to what happened when CNN reporter Jim Acosta tried to ask a question.
There's a chance. You are attacking our news organization. Can you give us a chance to ask a question, sir?
Go ahead.
Sir, can you state,
Quiet.
Mr. President-elect,
Go ahead.
can you state categorically,
Mr.
President-elect, can you give us a question?
Don't be
You're
rude.
attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Can you give us a question?
I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir.
Now, Trump did concede that Russia hacked the Democratic National Committee headquarters, but said it could help the United States if he develops a relationship with Vladimir Putin.
If Putin likes Donald Trump, I consider that an asset, not a liability, because we have a horrible relationship with Russia. Russia can help us fight ISIS, which, by the way, is number one tricky.
This unconfirmed report, our relationship with Russia and his relationship with the press, is where we'll start tonight. Joining me are Dan Primack, a business editor at Axios.com. It's going to launch next week. Is that right? Congratulations on that. Lila Alphonse is managing editor of news at U.S. News and World Report. Hey, Lila, nice to see you. Jim Walsh is a senior research associate at MIT Security Studies Program. Jim, good to see you, too. Jim, let me start with you. This unconfirmed Russia connection thing.
Yep.
The press guy started, Sean Spicer, on it. Mike Pence talked about it. The president-elect unqualifiedly rejected the whole thing, fake news, the whole deal. But the denials don't end this thing, do they?
Not at all. This is a serious deal. Now, is it going to turn out that this sort of raw intelligence, which is what these memos are, is it going to turn out that all these things are true? No, it is not. But it's not going to be completely dismissed either. I mean, the intelligence community would not have briefed the president on this with the summary that they did if they weren't a little concerned about it. So they're going to investigate it. They're going to cross-reference with signals intelligence, other intelligence. And so what you'll find is a lot of it will get thrown out. But some of it may stick, and then in the effort of trying to learn more, they may find other things. So keep your eye on this. This could be big.
Also, while most people have been focused on the tawdry details that we're not going to get into, there's also a much more serious part of this that's taken a back burner. I'll read from the dossier, according to BuzzFeed. Source E, an ethnic Russian close associate, so-and-so and so, admitted there was a well-developed conspiracy of cooperation between them and the Russian leadership, meaning the Trump organization. They go on to say, confirmed that an intelligence exchange had been running between them for at least 8 years. This is really serious. And my thesis, not knowing as much as you do about the intelligence community, after they were trashed by this president-elect in the last couple of weeks, retaliation is not impossible to conceive. They're going to really dig on this thing for that reason alone, are they not?
Well, I think they would dig regardless. The allegation here is that a foreign government, mostly an adversary, a foreign government deliberately conducted cyber attacks to undermine the U.S. election.
No, let me go further. And a foreign government, at least according to this line, worked cooperatively with the Trump organization, sharing information for 8 years.
Very serious.
So is this, I thought he did a pretty effective job of just saying this is, not happening today, went down the line. He stayed relatively calm. Is the public satisfied so far if nothing more comes out or no?
I don't think the public's satisfied at all. This has come up time and again throughout the campaign, let alone going 8 years back, really. It's come up over and over again, his friendship or his relationship.
Didn't he, though?
He did.
Yeah, okay,
he did. And you know what? That's not in dispute here. I don't think this is just sour grapes from the left. I really think that there's a concern over what kind of access Russian operatives had to members of his campaign, and more than that, why they would want to cultivate that kind of access. The question now isn't what already happened, it's why did it happen and what's the goal?
The other thing that I am not one who likes Nazi references from anybody about anything. Yep. There's that, and then there's everything else in the world. I'm sure you've seen the tweet that he was asked about today. Yes. Intelligence agencies should never have allowed this fake news to leak into the public. One last shot at me. Are we living in Nazi Germany? Same question on another issue. Does the public, that really makes me totally uncomfortable, even if I agreed with his underlying thesis.
Look, the statement's awful. As somebody whose family wouldn't exist if we were in Nazi Germany, it's very problematic. And obviously, being criticized is very different. He said even today, he repeated it during the press conference.
Oh, he did?
Yep. He talked about it a lot. Said, this is what they did in Nazi Germany. I don't think that's exactly what they did in Nazi Germany. Going beyond that, there are polls that say that most Americans wish he would basically delete his Twitter account or change it into kind of an official, POTUS Twitter account. He's obviously not going to. Look, the big question during the campaign, or a big question and an assumption by a lot of people, was he becomes president, the candidate goes away. Clearly not. The candidate is what we have, and we are going to have for 4 years. It's not changing.
Well, one of the ways the candidate remained is attacking the media. And this fake news, this back and forth with Jim Acosta, you may not like it considering what you do.
No,
it's
okay
sold big time. The people who do what you and I do for a living are right below Vladimir Putin in the minds of the American people.
My grandmother's a politician. She said you can't trust politicians or journalists, and then she'd introduce me.
But don't you? But I'm serious. Don't you think that attack on Acosta, whether you liked it or not today,
that was uncalled for.
Yeah, but don't you think it sells with the folks back home?
It sells with the folks who are reading his Twitter feed. It sells with his core supporters who have bought into the idea that an independent press isn't actually independent. It sells with the same people who were just fine with whatever WikiLeaks brought out about Hillary Clinton or Podesta or anything coming from the Democratic Party.
What do you mean just fine? I mean, no one denied the content.
No one denied.
They may not like the process.
Well, they said some of it was unverified, but my point is they were fine with the fact that they saw the raw information. So as far as they're concerned, the raw information is the truth. In this case, you've got a dossier which is somehow no longer okay.
By the way, the press didn't cover itself in glory, though, after the Acosta thing, which is the following people who got called on repeatedly, none of them basically said, I'm giving my question to Jim Acosta, I'm giving my question to CNN.
Wonderful point.
Yep.
So let's move ahead to another topic here. Today's news conference, as you know, was originally called so Trump could outline how he would structure his business interests while being president of the United States.
My two sons, who are right here, Don and Eric, are going to be running the company. They are going to be running it in a very professional manner. They're not going to discuss it with me.
A Trump executive will join the Sons along with an ethics advisor. Trump's attorney also said he is not under any constitutional pressure to remove himself from the businesses, but was doing so to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest. He also said Ivanka, his daughter, won't be part of the business. She'll be moving to D.C. with her husband, Jared Kushner, who will be advising Trump in the White House. Dan, since you're the business guy, they tried to create a wall of sorts here. He will retain ownership. The lawyer, Sherry Dillon, went out of her way to say no blind trust. He's not going to sell the stuff. Did they split the baby? Did they share? Did they do the job they needed to do today?
They split the baby, but that doesn't work, as we know. You don't split. I mean, so yeah, they tried to split the baby, but the ownership is really important, and the ownership would be less important if we had the tax returns, which we don't have. And you saw Trump during the press conference today use Nelson Rockefeller as an example of, rich guy didn't have to sell all his stuff. True.
Well, he didn't use it. The lawyer said.
Right. The lawyer said it. But that said, Rockefeller turned his tax returns over to the federal government, to the FBI, which he hasn't done. If we had the taxes, the ownership wouldn't matter.
Okay, but the same question to you on this. There was a back and forth with the reporter. Doesn't the public want you to disclose your taxes?
I think some of the public
no, and
does.
he says, "You sure that?" And he says, "I won."
Yep, he says, and no one's disputing that he won. That there was not a single moment during the press conference whenever anyone said, "Well, we're not sure whether you're legit." That never came up. It's you need to disclose your tax information in order to properly vet your financial situation, and in order to properly protect yourself against allegations of conflicts of interest. He says only the press cares about his tax
Let's see if we can find a real person. Oh, there he is. Jim, let's ask you, the real people, I mean, they say in polls, I'm not saying polls are phony, but everything is priorities.
Yep.
Do the people, are they sitting at home saying, I really feel that unless I know all of his finances and where his business dealings are. He denied that he had any loans, business connections, etc. In Russia. And by the way, this dossier said that he turned down all the deals the Russians offered, I should say. Do real people care about this?
I don't think so. The polls say that a big majority of Americans want him to release his tax forms.
They do.
But is that their top priority? No, you've got to think that the economy and the other sort of traditional issues are going to be important. But if there is scandal in the future, if there are problems, then that's going to come back in a much stronger way. I will add on this, by the way, the thing that was striking to me, almost bizarre, was when he got up at one point and said, listen, I'm president. None of the rules apply to me. In fact, last week, this guy from Dubai offered me $2 billion. Now, I could have taken it, but I decided not to.
But, that may be odd, but he's technically correct about those rules not applying.
But what I would say is the fact that he is entertaining those offers, said no to this one, leaves open the possibility that he would very much entertain that in the future.
So you said a minute ago what people care about most. One of the things they care about most is health care. The first domestic priority for the Trump administration is getting rid of Obamacare, called the Affordable Care Act.
We're going to be submitting, as soon as our secretary is approved, almost simultaneously, shortly thereafter, a plan. It'll be repeal and replace. It will be essentially simultaneously. It will be various segments, you understand, but will most likely be on the same day or the same week, but probably the same day.
He went on to say maybe even the same hour. Is that not reassuring? Even if people don't want to repeal
it's
the
certainly
reality.
not realistic.
Why is it not realistic?
Well, to craft a replacement for Obamacare is something that will take much longer than have it ready at the same hour.
Paul Ryan says he's been thinking about it for years, the Speaker of the House.
But something's still not on paper, and it hasn't been presented, even though they've been trying to repeal it. How many times now? 37?
No, it's in the 50s. But let's not trying. They actually have voted to repeal.
Right.
It's just been vetoed by the president or not gotten through the Senate on some occasions. Even if it turns out that they could craft a thing, is there any evidence? There are a handful of GOP people, particularly senators, who said I want it to be simultaneous. Is there any reason to think that the rest of the Republican infrastructure is going to say we have to do it simultaneously? Will they listen to the president of their own party?
It's hard to tell. You've already got people on the Republican side who are breaking with Trump, who are saying that no, they just want to flat out repeal. They want to dismantle it completely and then maybe delay the implementation of the dismantling. And there's no consensus there.
I think that's where you'll see a difference between the House and the Senate,
Meaning
right?
what?
If you're a House member, you represent one little district. If you are in the Senate, you represent your entire state.
Right.
So if you go and tear something up and have nothing to replace it, you're going to have lots and lots of people in your state outside of some tiny congressional district who might be pretty angry.
Well, especially if you have a lot of those 20 million people who weren't covered before. So you're the money man here, Mr.
Sure.
Business Guy. The thing that no one has explained to me, by the way, one of the things they did with this reconciliation thing they voted last week is 51 votes only. Right. They can repeal the penalties, for example, for not complying with the buying, which means essentially they could gut the whole thing. If you're going to keep something like that everybody loves, keep your kid on your plan until you're 26. No ban for pre-existing conditions, which virtually everybody loves. And Trump says he wants to keep both. How do they pay for these things without this mandate?
They don't. Look, Obamacare, the ACA, was a carrot and stick. And those things you talked about that everybody loves, those are the carrots. The stick are the things like the penalties. It doesn't work. Now, look, maybe there's some novel way. But as you said, Paul Ryan hasn't come up with it in years. And Trump today was asked, the second part of the question was, give us the broad strokes of the details. And he came back with absolutely nothing. Right. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. That's just a problem with it.
Okay, so while much of the nation was focused on the president-elect in New York this morning, confirmation hearings for several of his appointment picks were continuing to go on in D.C., among them Secretary of State pick and former Exxon CEO Rex Tillerson, who has faced criticism for his relationship with Vladimir Putin. Today he presented a strong front on how he'd deal with Russia.
Russia must know that we will be accountable to our commitments and those of our allies, and that Russia must be held to account for its actions.
Despite an interruption by a protester who had to be taken out, Tillerson continued on, but when pressed in response to a question from Republican Marco Rubio, he refused to label Putin as a war criminal and said he hasn't discussed U.S. policy toward Russia with Trump. And all today was a reminder of a bad political season for Massachusetts, with Tillerson on the stand instead of Mitt Romney, along with the announcement of David Shulkin as the next Veteran Affairs Secretary, which means Scott Brown will not be that person. Let's talk just about the Secretary of State thing. How is the world in which you operate feel about this guy? Even if he wasn't their first choice, how do they feel about him?
I think that there's a general view that given the other national security appointments, Michael Flynn and others, that maybe Tillerson might be the adult in the room, and that wouldn't be...
Well, General Mattis has gotten pretty high.
And that's where
Seth Moulton worked for him and loves him.
Well, and I've met with General Mattis when he was at CENTCOM. And, but the feeling was that Tillerson and Mattis might be that sort of guy. Then the word on the street was, in his meetings with senators these last couple of weeks, Tillerson did not come off as competent and professional as they expected. And so increasingly people were really putting their hopes on Mattis.
And by the way, the guy who everybody thought was going to be the most controversial, Sessions, started testifying yesterday. Today, a panel of African-American leaders, including Cory Booker, senator from Jersey, I think the first sitting senator ever to testify against another sitting senator as a nominee. The reality is he cleared the hurdles yesterday, did he not?
He really seemed to. You had the Congressional Black Caucus there in the room. You had Cory Booker. You had civil rights icons, people who were speaking out about the importance of the civil rights movement, But aside from a couple of voices, most of them fell pretty squarely on the side of, okay, Sessions he'll be all right.
My favorite headline in this whole thing, today's Boston Globe, the lead story, it speaks to the state of affairs in 2017. Sessions vows to enforce the law. Well, that's a radical, that's really a pretty, but he did pass. I mean, he basically denied all the stuff from the past when
Which he
passed
has
the
before.
but passed the test.
He failed, obviously, when he denied it before in the 80s. He was denied a federal judgeship.
But all he needs is that it was a very different Senate. He just needs Republicans. Even every Democrat probably will vote against him, and it will not matter.
And he only needs a simple majority now. He doesn't need to clear the 60-vote hurdle.
Speaking of 60 votes, Trump also announced today that he's moving swiftly to make the nation's highest court whole yet again.
I'll be making the decision on who we will put up for Justice of the United States Supreme Court, a replacement for the great, great Justice Scalia. That will be probably within 2 weeks of the 20th.
Trump added that with the help of the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation and a few others, he's already met with several of the 20 people he identified as possible nominees during the campaign. You mentioned just the 51 votes. When the Democrats, who are now being hoisted on their own petard, I think, lowered the threshold for cabinet appointees, as you mentioned, to 51 from 60, that's supermajority, and for federal judges other than the Supreme Court to 51, did they not provide an opening? They have 52 Republican senators. They need 60 votes under the current rules. What essentially the Republican leaders are saying, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If we don't get 8 Democratic votes, we're going to do the so-called nuclear option that you used a couple of years ago, and we'll approve whoever the nominee is by 51.
I think this is a case where the Senate really thought that they'd have a different president coming in. But I'd like to point out that no matter who Trump chooses right now, most conservative pick he can come up with, he's just restoring the court to what it was a year or so ago, or pre-February last year. It's not going to make a huge difference. It's the next appointee that can really
Ruth Bader
change.
Ginsburg in her 80s and not terribly well, the liberal icon, notorious RBG.
That's where the tenor of the court could change depending on who he picks. This right now is kind of just an exercise.
Very quickly, even if they make the case, well, the Democrats did it, so we're doing the same thing to lower the threshold. Will the people not think, well, when you're talking about the Supreme Court, there does have to be something special? Am I wrong about that?
Well, I think, quote, the people will think that, but does that mean the senators are going to go along with that? Probably not. They're going to try to get their person through.
Okay, we got to go. Nice to see you. Good luck with your venture starting next week.
Nice
Well, it's
see
great
you.
to see you. Jim as well.
Good to see you, my friend.
Thanks so much. Appreciate your time.